he was sitting at the table and he looked at her and he said, I'm not surprised. My brother was quite a scoundrel. So I actually think that's funny because I call us NPEs now the children of scoundrels. So
Hello, you are listening to NPE Stories. This is a podcast where NPEs can share their story. I am your host, Lily, and I found out I was an NPE through an ancestry DNA test that changed my life forever. NPE is a term that stands for not parent expected or non-paternal event. This means that one or more of our parents are not who we believe them to be. NPE Stories is a podcast where NPEs can share their story of what their original family was like, how they found out they were an NPE, and what their journey has been like since the day they found out. Welcome to episode 74. I want to mention an article about male NPEs in our community, and I've addressed this online, but I realize I don't think I've spoken about it on the podcast yet. And the article I am referring to is from Severance magazine, and it was published February 1st, 2021. It's written by our very own Brad Ewell. Sorry, Brad, about the pronunciation of the last name, but Brad was on the NPE Stories podcast here from episode 25. If you're interested in his story, he is a late discovery adoptee, and he shared his story, and he ended up writing this great article. Let me click the link for Severance magazine, which is an online magazine for people who have experienced a DNA surprise, severancemag.com. The article is Why Don't Men Want to Talk About It? And the subline is Men are relatively scarce in Facebook support groups, and even when they are present, they seldom participate. What's behind the reluctance to share their feelings? I loved this article. Well done, well written. He addressed various studies about why men don't want to share or why they're a bit more, lurking on our sites. He also spoke with a few marriage and family therapists about it. And you can read about this article. And I really just want to encourage men to talk about their feelings and share on the NPE sites and to continue to share their story. So thank you, Brad, for addressing this. Please read the article to get the whole story behind this. Again, that's from severancemag.com. The editor is BK Jackson, and she founded this magazine, and I love it. So I wanted to make sure and mention this today. We are the NPE Stories podcast, and we get stories from NPEs and find out where they are on their journey. And today we are speaking with Annie about her story. Hi, Annie.
Hi, Lily. How are you?
I'm good. I'm glad to talk to you again. Do you remember being on the same Zoom call a while back?
You were sitting on your porch, if I remember. And that was the first time I heard of your podcast. And I had actually contacted you soon after that. I think it was probably in June. And it was like, I had just gone out because of COVID and I didn't know how long I was going to be home. And wow, do I want to schedule something for October? Because October seemed so far away. Well, now it's March of 2021 and I'm just now getting my turn. So I've been looking forward to doing this podcast.
Well, thank you so much for being willing to share. I've seen you on the Facebook groups. I've seen you on, especially, I think, what are we on? NPEs only after the discovery.
Yeah.
And I've seen you on that Zoom, that NPE call, and I know you're really involved. So it's nice to finally hear your story today. Okay. So you know how this works. So I will let you kind of take it from here. And if you could start a little bit with your background and, we'd like to know what your original family was like and what your childhood was like.
Okay. Well, I'm the youngest of three in my family of origin. And my mom was a secretary. My dad, when I was really young, he worked in a factory. And probably around the time I started first grade, he got a job at the post office. So middle class. My brother was 9 years older than me. My sister was 6 years older than me. My dad, I refer to him now as my dad, to distinguish between my birth father and him. My dad was a first generation American. His parents were from Italy. And my mom was Irish and with a little tiny bit of Dutch. Her grandfather was part Dutch. Um, and I didn't know any of my grandparents. They were all gone before I was born. Um, and, we lived a pretty normal family unit. Um, we, we lived in a two-family house. My aunt and uncle lived downstairs, and they had no kids. I did not know anyone in my mom's family except for my aunt who lived downstairs. For whatever reason, she was estranged from her family. I don't know why. I never got that story, even though I've since met some people from her side of the family. So I basically grew up in an Italian universe because my dad's family, everybody was Italian. He had four siblings. They had kids. I was the youngest of seven cousins, so there were seven first cousins altogether. Everyone was significantly older than me, so I basically grew up as an only child. And so my universe was kind of formed from an Italian perspective. Um, my mom always worked. My dad always worked. And it was basically 5 days a week, dinner at 6, do your homework, go to school, that kind of thing. Um, so it was a pretty standard New York City nuclear family, I guess. And so there was nothing significant that gave me any hints, except the fact that I did not look Italian. But I never questioned that. I had no reason to. But I did not look like anyone else in my family. And I always kind of felt like an outsider. Even though they never made me feel that way, I felt that way. And I just thought it was because of the age differences and everybody was so much older. Like my parents were a lot older than my friends' parents. My mom was 33 when I was born, and in 1961, that was kind of on the older side. All my friends' parents were much younger than my mom and dad. And, they sent me to school. I didn't go to public school. I went to Catholic school. Um, and that was pretty much it. I mean, there was nothing remarkable in my upbringing, and nothing that would lead me to believe that I wasn't who I was told I was, as far as my heritage.
Thank you so much for giving that background. I I knew you were East Coast, so New York City, right?
Yeah, yes,
Okay.
yes.
So how did you find out you were an NPE?
In 2000, the Ellis Island records went live online. And all I knew was my dad's parents came through Ellis Island in the early 1900s, and I was able to get some information from his only living sister, who was actually still alive, but I haven't seen her in a very long time, where they came from. Like I knew they were from Naples, but I didn't know where. She gave me some information that she had on their boat, which turned out to be wrong, but anyway. But I did the search on Ellis Island, and I found the ship's manifest for my dad's mother, and she was 9 years old, and she came over from Naples with there were five sisters and their mother, and they were alone. Their dad was already here in the US with his brothers. So here's a woman traveling with five little girls all by herself on a ship from Naples. And I was so excited when I saw that. I was like, oh my God, I can't believe it. My grandmother, right there on this thing, somebody wrote down her name and she was 9 years old. And it kind of gave me the genealogy book. Around that time, I think it was Ancestry, but it might have been AOL, had a program called Family Tree Maker, and they were offering it for free. So I downloaded it and I started doing my family tree, and I put all the information in, and all the stuff we do on Ancestry to build our trees and get the hints and all that stuff. And, years had gone by, and in 2011, I guess it was 2011, I had been a long time subscriber of Ancestry. So they sent me an email and they said that they were developing an at-home DNA test. And would I be interested as a subscriber in getting kind of like the first dibs of taking this new technology, an at-home DNA test? And I said, yes, sign me up. So about a year later, they sent me a link that, here you can purchase the DNA test. I bought it immediately. I spit in the tube and I sent it away. And I had been doing genealogy off and on, over those years, over those 12 years since I first found that ship's manifest. And I didn't have a very extensive tree simply because my dad's mother only had sisters. So I couldn't find anyone else with our name. His brother, my grandfather's brothers had no kids. So my grandfather was the only one who had kids. And so my last name was not coming up in many searches that I was doing before I got the DNA results back. So I get the results back. It was probably May or June of 2012. And I open it up and I see this list of names. And I see that it says I'm 99% Irish. And I looked at that and I was like, but I'm not 99% Irish. I'm only half Irish. I'm half Italian. This must be wrong. But I didn't think anything of it. And I looked at the names and I'm like, I don't recognize any of these names and none of them are Italian. Oh, well, and I closed it and I went on with my life. And I did some research, the usual ancestry stuff. And every once in a while, I'd get emails from them. You have new matches. And it was always names that I didn't recognize. I did get some names that I knew were my mother's side because even though I didn't know her family, I knew their names. Like I knew, this cousin, that niece, that kind of stuff. So I did match with people on my mother's side. So I knew there wasn't anything wrong with the test itself, but I couldn't figure out why it still said that I was 99% Irish. And who are all these people? I didn't know anything about centimorgans. I didn't know how to read any of that stuff. And my thought processes was, this is a new test. They don't have a very big database. People aren't taking it. Maybe it's not as popular as they hoped it was going to be. And I really didn't pay any attention to it. So in 2015, I got an email from a woman named Shannon, and she said, "Hi, we have a pretty high match. The number range was first cousin once removed." And she said, "I'm trying to fit you into my tree. I looked at your tree. I can't figure out how we're related. Maybe you could take a look." So I looked at her tree and I didn't see any names that I recognized and all of these Irish people that I didn't know. And now I'm like thinking there's something wrong with this because I would have thought by now I would have a match that was Italian after all this time. And I still wasn't getting any Italian matches. And then I looked at the results closer and I started to figure out how to read them. Like, what do these numbers mean? So when I I emailed Shannon back, and I said, I'm really sorry. I said, I have no idea how we're related. I said, if I come up with something in my research, I'll get back to you. And that was the end of our conversation. So now I'm starting to get suspicious. And I have a very good friend. I actually have a probably a larger number of friends who are adopted than most people, but I have a number of friends who are adopted. And one of my friends, who I've known since high school, she found her birth family, or her maternal birth family, the old-fashioned way. She hired a detective, and they searched the records, and they found her maternal family. So she was trying to kind of help me navigate what she thought was happening. And I said, the only way to explain this is if my father isn't my father, Mario, isn't my birth father. I said, but I don't see that being the case. I mean, my mom my parents were kind of strict. I had a curfew when I was in high school. I had to be home by a certain time. So it was out of character. The woman I knew as my mother, this was not in her character. And I said, that's really the only explanation, is that he's not my birth father.
Hmm.
So another friend of ours, also adopted, she offered to, research is like her thing. She's been a student since, she's 61 years old, and she's always going to school. So she loves going to school. She loves learning new things. She's a lawyer. She's a doctor. She's a professor. She's not an Indian chief, but she's basically just about everything else. And she was actually learning how to do genetics at the time. And she said, well, look, if you want me to help you, we'll see. Maybe we can, kind of look at all the records, and we can put stuff together. I'm like, I don't know even if this is true, how am I ever going to know? My mother's been dead since 1994. Anybody that would know anything is gone. I have nobody that I can ask. So at the same time, I'm thinking, well, maybe the test is wrong. So my wife decided she wanted to do an ancestry test. So she sent away for one and mistakenly bought two. So she got her test. She did her test. She sent it in. It came back exactly as she expected. She's part German, part Irish, part Norwegian, part this, part that. Everything she knew that she was came out correct. So I said, I should call Ancestry and find out what, maybe it was a mistake. So I call Ancestry, and I get somebody on the phone. And this was still kind of early on, where they weren't as, let's say, sensitive to people calling up with these questions. So I said, this is what happened. I'm not finding anyone. So he pulled up my my account, and he said, well, it looks like your father is not your birth father. Like, just flat out, just like that. I was like, oh,
Wow.
okay. That was pretty, all right. You just got right to it, and you told me what it was. And I said, well, what if it's wrong? He said, well, look, it's not wrong. But he said, we can't give you a refund on the test, but we can do something with your subscription. We can maybe give you 6 months free, that kind of thing. He said, but it's not. He said, it's probably not wrong. So I took that extra test that my wife had, and I called my sister, and I said, look, I took this test, this DNA test. She knew I had been doing genealogy and family tree and all that stuff. And I said, would you take a test for me? She said, yeah, of course, I'll take a test. So I sent her the test. She took it, and it came back half Irish, half Italian, just what she is, what I always thought I was. So that kind of solidified it. I did take a 23andMe test as well at the same time. And it also came back that I was like 98 or 99% Irish. So Now I'm kind of in shock. I never had that feeling of devastation that a lot of people had um, when I hear their stories and stuff. And I don't know if it was distance from my parents' death because they've been gone a long time. We were never really very close. So I didn't have like a daddy's girl kind of relationship with my dad. They were pretty emotionally disconnected to us. And I actually talked to my sister about it a couple years ago to see if like I was treated differently. And she said, no, they treated all three of us the same way. Like there was nothing kid centric in our
Yeah.
upbringing. We were not allowed to have friends over for no other reason than they both worked and they didn't want screaming kids in the house. Um, so there was a lot of distrust by my mother of all of our friends, my brother, my sister, and myself. So, it was just, that was just kind of our household. There wasn't a lot of displays of affection. They weren't touchy feely kind of people. I don't know what that was. I don't know if it had anything to do with who I was. I don't know what was going on in their life when I was conceived. Um, but I wasn't mad. I was angry for a number of reasons. I was angry that I didn't think I'd ever know. I was angry that I couldn't ask her why she never told me. And I was just kind of angry at the whole situation, but not overly angry. Like it was just kind of in inner turmoil, I guess would be a good way to describe it. And I never kept it a secret. I told my sister right away. My brother died in 2006, so he wasn't even around to find out. I don't have any contact with my birth certificate father's family simply because we've just grown apart. And I was never close with them anyway because they were all adults by the time I was born. So, I have cousins that I know them, but they're a lot older than me. So I don't have any familial connections, anybody.
Mhm.
And I think that made it easier for me when I did find out the information. I kind of reconciled those feelings by thinking about it like my mom was 32 when I was conceived and how I was when I was 32. And it's like, well, that's kind of a ripe age for a woman. I don't know what was happening in their life. My parents, they had just bought a house a year before, 2 years before I was born. It could have been pressure. They could have been fighting. They could have had an arrangement. I have no idea. And I reconciled my anger by coming to terms with the fact that it's none of my business what their personal life was. And once I got to that point, the anger kind of dissipated. So now I was able to concentrate more on how am I going to find out who my family is? Who are all these people? Who are all these strangers on this list that I don't know? Or how are they
Mhm.
related to me? So 2015 was when Shannon contacted me. So in 2017, I got a high match that said first cousin. It's like, wow, first cousin. Okay, now we're getting somewhere. So I immediately contacted the person and I knew enough not to say, hey, guess what? I emailed the person. His name was Ed. And we match pretty high as first cousins on Ancestry. I said, can you just tell me if your mother had any brothers? And he emailed me back pretty much within a day. And he said, yeah, my mom had brothers. They were both priests. Oh, you have got to be kidding me. So I'm thinking, he said, well, look at my tree. He goes, my sister knows more about this stuff than I do. I do have a tree. Go look at my tree. I'm like, so I go look at his tree, and his uncles, or the two brothers, were born in like 1909 and 1913 or something. And we weren't church going people. So my mother wouldn't have had a priest in her social circle, let's say. And that was like 10 and 15 years older than she was. So I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
I don't think this is it. I don't think it's the priest. So I look at his tree, and I'm looking at all these names, and I'm like, hey, wait a minute. That name sounds familiar. Oh, wait, that name sounds familiar too. Where did I see these names? And then I remembered Shannon. So I go over to Shannon's tree, and here is Ed and his brothers and his mother and all his mother's sisters and Shannon's father and Shannon's father's brothers and sisters. And I looked and I said, holy shit. I said, Shannon's father's brother is married to Ed's mother's sister. And those are my grandparents. It literally fell in my lap in a day. After 5 years of not knowing, my grandparents fell right in my lap. So my grandparents had 5 kids, and they had 2 girls, and 2 girls and 3 boys. So one of these 3 boys is my birth father. Like, so now what? So now I'm going back and forth with Ed. I get back in touch with Shannon. They're an unbelievable amount of help to me. They're giving me names. They're giving me dates. They're giving me trees. They're giving me everything that I could ever, like, they overwhelmed me with information. It was so much that they both had to do. So now I just have to figure out, well, which of these 3 children, which of these 3 boys is my birth father? Well, how am I going to find that out? Only one of them is still alive. So the one that's still alive is about 10 years younger than my mom. And the other 2 were both younger, but my birth father ended up being 4 years younger than my mom. And the other one was a little younger than that. So now I have, all of these 3 brothers have 5 or 6, 7 kids each. Good Irish Catholic family. The only thing I could do is hope that one of these kids takes the test, and it would be my sibling. So now all I can do is wait. So Ed gets back to me a couple months later, and we had been having regular communication. And he said, I go to Florida. He lives in Rochester. He said, I go to Florida with my wife. He said, we're retired, and with snowbirds, we go in the winter and we see the oldest of these 5 children of your grandparents. Her name is Jacqueline. I said, oh, okay. He goes, when we go, I'll see if I can kind of, drive the conversation and see if she knows anything. I said, okay, well, I would appreciate that. That would be great. So a couple months go by, and he sends me an email. He said, we just left Jacqueline's house. He said, I couldn't figure out a way to bring it up. He said, but I took her daughter, Kira, into another room, and I told her exactly what was going on, and that one of the 3 brothers was my birth father. And so he said, if you would want to speak to Kira, he said, she might be able to have more information. So I said, yeah, that'd be great. So he gives me Kira's email address, and we start emailing back and forth. We talk on the phone a couple of times, and she said she just came right out and told her mother. She said, Ma, look, this is what happened. One of the 3. We don't think it's this one, the one that's alive. We think it's one of these 2. And she said, nope, My brothers are dead. I don't want to talk about it. It's none of my business. We have to mind our business. So she said to me, she goes, don't worry about it. I'll work on it. So now it turned out Kira is also adopted. So I have adoptees all throughout my universe here. And so Kira said, I'll speak to my mom. We'll talk to my aunt. We'll see what we could figure out. So a few weeks later, it was Easter, and on Easter, Ed and his wife were invited over to Jacqueline's house, and they also invited one of Kira's cousins who lives in Miami. They're in Florida. So the cousin lives in Miami. So she drove up for the day, and they were sitting around and talking. And the conversation came around to the old days. So Ed's wife said, "Oh, didn't your dad work for IBM?" And she said, "No, he worked for Sinclair and Valentine. Sinclair and Valentine was a printing ink company, and that's where my mother was a secretary." So, once again, dropped right in my lap. So now I know for sure that this is who my birth father is. They didn't say anything to the daughter, my sister. They just, Ed and his wife kind of looked at each other because they knew this information already. Because I had given them, here's where she worked, here's what she did. She went bowling on Friday, she did this, she did that. So they knew. And when I ended up meeting them later on, he said that when she said that company, it was all they could do to not like go, oh my God, and like exclaim out loud, like, you won't even believe it. They had to like keep quiet until they left. So, so he gives me this information. And so now I'm like 99% sure that that's him, because the other brother did not work there. And there was no other connection. So this was the connection. So about a month later, the family has a Facebook page, a Facebook group, a private group for just the family members. And I get a call from Shannon, and she says, "You're not going to believe it. One of Mike's daughters took a DNA test on 23andMe, and she comes into the Facebook group and she goes, 'Hey, this person named Annie came up as a first cousin on my 23andMe list. Who's Annie?'" So now nobody knows, except Shannon and Ed and a couple of second cousins, Kira, you know. So Shannon immediately gets on the phone and calls this cousin, and she tells her, "Look, this is the story. Your Uncle Gene, this is what happened. This is Gene's daughter." So now the cousin she says, "Well, I'm going to have to talk to my dad, and I'm going to have to talk to my sister and my brother, and we're going to have a conversation." So she goes, and she tells Shannon, she goes, "Let me talk to my dad and I'll call you back." So she goes and talks to her dad, and her dad says, "Mind your business. It's none of your business. I don't know anything about it, but it's none of your business." So Maureen calls Shannon back and says, "Look, my dad doesn't want to talk about it. He says he doesn't know anything. I don't know I don't know now how to proceed with this. But he says he doesn't know anything." And it just so happened that when Maureen, the cousin, left her dad's house, she left her cell phone at the house. So she had to go back and get it. And when she went back, he was sitting at the table, and he looked at her and he said, he goes, "I'm not surprised. My brother was quite a scoundrel." And so I actually think that's funny, because I call us NPEs now the children of scoundrels. So so anyway, but he didn't know anything. He was significantly younger than the oldest brother, so he didn't really know anything anyway. So now Jackie, Aunt Jackie, Kira kind of brought her around, and we had a conversation on the phone after that, and we talked for about 2 hours. She came around. It was like my cousin thought if she could put a voice to a stranger, that her mother would be more willing to accept me. So and it worked, and we talked for about 2 hours on the phone, and I actually went and visited them in in 2019. 2019? Yes, in 2019. So I met my birth father's sister, and I met cousin Ed, and I had met Shannon, and we had lunch a few times since we connected in 2015. Aunt Jackie accepted me right into the family, and she went into the house, and she said, "You come over here and sit by me." And we talked, and she looked at me, she said, "You look just like my brother." And they were very close. They were like just a little over a year apart. So they were the two oldest. They were very, very close. And I could kind of see it in her face. She said, "You look just like my brother." And so that made me feel good. Before I met them, and that was in January of 2019, I wrote a letter to my siblings. There were six of them. One passed away, so there are five left. And it took me a long time to compose it. I read it, I edited it 20,000 times. I printed up some photos, and I had a member of our after the discovery group find an address for me, and I picked one sibling out of the five to send it to, and I included pictures. I gave him the whole story from A to Z, so he didn't think I was trying to scam anything. And I mailed it. I sent it by FedEx, and waited. And he about 10 days later, I got a response from him, and he said, needless to say, he was shocked. And he said he shared it with his siblings, and they decided that because it seemed to be a secret that was meant to be kept, that's what they wanted to do, was keep that secret. Their mother is still alive, so I kind of get that. He said, if we communicate, I prefer it by email. He gave me his email address. I said, okay, that's fine. And I said, I emailed him back, and I said, I appreciate, your response. I understand. I said, look, I'm not here to disrupt anybody's life. I don't want to, I don't think your mother deserves to know about me, because that's not fair to her. She's in the twilight of her years, and nobody deserves, even if she knew that he was a scoundrel, and she probably did, um, you know, he, she doesn't deserve to have that kind of hurt, um, appear in her life. And I would never do that to, anybody. And I assured him of that a number of times. And, he said, I really appreciate your sensitivity to that. They all have kids. They didn't want to diminish their kids' memories of their grandfather, that kind of thing. I said, I understand. I said, look, if you could give me medical information, I'm happy with that. I said, if it turns out a few years from now, if we want to have a relationship, then that's great. If not, that's fine too. And I left it at that. And we had sent a few emails back and forth, over a couple months. In April of 2019, a bunch of friends and I went to Philadelphia. Um, it was a Game of Thrones premiere episode tradition that we had, and we'd go to like different places every year when the Game of Thrones first
Mhm.
episode came on. So we went to Philadelphia, and it just so happened that the brother that I was in communication with he worked in Philadelphia. He lives in South Jersey. So while we were there for 4 days. On a whim, I sent him an email. I said, I'm in Philadelphia. Do you want to meet for coffee? And I was expecting to just not hear anything from him at all. But he emailed me back right away. He said, well, where are you? Where do you want to meet? And I said, well, this is where my hotel is. I don't know Philadelphia, so pick a place and I'll just show up. So we met, sat in the restaurant for about 2 hours. I found out more stuff, meeting him in person. It was weird to see someone who looked like me.
Mhm.
Um, I literally I never looked like anyone in my family. In that way, I kind of felt like an adoptee. I had visual, no visual confirmation of myself. You know what I mean? So to see someone that looked like me, it was a little kind of shocking. Um, and he said, of all of us, he said, I'm probably the worst one you could have reached out to. He said, because I'm so bad at staying in contact with anybody. He said, I barely talk to my own brothers and sisters if they don't call me. I said, you hit the lottery. I don't know what to tell you. I kind of hoped that meeting would spark something, but it really didn't. Um, we had emailed back and forth a few times after that, but it was always me. Um, it was always me who initiated an email. Can you tell me this? Can you tell me that? Hi, how are you? Just checking in. And it was always a very brief response from him. But they all know about me. And I like to go on Facebook and get my petty on. And every time I see one of them comment on something, I'll go and comment too, like, with the different cousins that I'm friends with on Facebook. But I just remind them that I'm still here. They haven't blocked me, so that's good. And that's pretty much it. I mean, I speak to my Aunt Jackie at least once a week. I'm closer to her than I ever was with anybody in the family I grew up with. Kira and I don't know if I mentioned it, she's also adopted. We've become very close, and I was actually able to find her, identify her birth parents, because I got,
Oh.
I convinced her to spit in the tube. So I
Mm.
was able to identify her birth parents for her. Um, and that's pretty much it. I actually just made plane reservations to go down to Florida to visit them in May, and I'm really excited about that because I've made and canceled because of COVID reservations twice.
And that's to see your Aunt Jackie, cousin
Yeah,
Kira.
and cousin Kira. Yeah, yeah. So I'm really excited about that.
And none of your other siblings, besides just that the one half brother, none of the other new siblings have contacted you.
Nope, no. And it's funny because last March, Kira's daughter got married, and the one of my siblings who lives in Florida went to the wedding. I was actually going to go, and it was right when COVID hit, like March 14th. They got married. And I was going to go, but then because of COVID, I canceled my reservation. But one of my sisters actually went to the wedding, and I spoke to Kira afterwards, and I said, "Did she say anything?" Not a word. Didn't say a single word. And they know who I've spoken to. So the people in the family that I'm in contact with, I was very straightforward in my letter of the people in the family that I've spoken to and who have given me information. But she never said a word. Never said a word.
Mm, mm.
So
I'm
they know who I
I'm
am.
sorry.
Then
Mhm.
I know. Listen, it's and one thing that Aunt Jackie said when I was down there a couple of years ago. She said when I was leaving, she said, "Don't you worry about those kids." She goes, "You're our family now. Just don't worry about it." And when she speaks to the other, so there are three of them left out of five. When she speaks to the other two, she tells me she talks about me all the time. She calls me our Annie.
Aw, I love it.
Yeah, I know. She's so great. I can't wait to see her.
You had me cracking up saying that, we are, children of scoundrels, aren't we? Aren't we really? That's a good one.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that came up at the retreat in October in Jersey, and
Oh, yeah.
after everyone had a few drinks and all the inhibitions come down, I told that part of the story, and so it kind of ballooned out from there. We're the children of scoundrels.
Okay. You might have a new listener wondering what this retreat is you're talking about. Can you briefly
I
describe that?
can. Yeah, in fact, we have one coming up in April. It's and for NPEs, adoptees, LDAs, and it's basically 4 days of fellowship. We hang out with our tribe. We have workshops. We have. I think this year we're having a hypnotist.
Mm,
We did art therapy, and it's just a lot of healing and crying and laughing, and we play games, and it's basically just being with people that you don't have to explain yourself to.
mm, mm.
Um,
Yes.
and it's so amazing and healing. The first one was in October of 2019, and I had not met any of our group in person. And that's not true. I met one person um, prior to the retreat, and it just when we all, especially we rent a house, so there's a central location, and some people stay in the house, and the people who stayed in the house, we've all just gotten so very close. We're like a little
Mm,
mini family within the larger group.
mm,
We so it, it it's just I can't even describe. I don't want to say magical because that's a little corny, but it's just healing. It's
mhm,
just like I met them, and it was like we always knew each other. That's how I felt.
mm. I wanna
And
go to one so bad.
I would highly recommend. Maybe you could come in
Mm.
October.
Ah,
Um,
October, I think, is the one I'm gonna hit. Yep.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I highly recommend it. I think you'll have a great time. I think you'll have a great.
And is that through I'll put that in the show notes, but I know you can find out information through, what is it, MPs only after the discovery, or is it
After the
high
discovery.
rate
Hireth
after
is
the discovery?
yeah, it's Hireth is the website. Um,
Okay.
I'd have to
I'll
double
try to
check
link
the.
both of those.
I think it's Hireth Hope and Healing is for the
Yep.
retreat information. And there's actually a website set up because they do some nonprofit stuff, and they sell merchandise, and it's a way to learn more about the different retreats. And there's
Cool.
yeah, it's actually it's set up really nice. There's photos from prior retreats, and so you can people can kind of get an idea of what it is and what happens there, and so basically during the day is all retreat stuff, and at night is dinner and everybody goes crazy. So, there's there's a lot of laughing, a lot of drinking, a lot of crying, a lot of, just being with each other. It's like I like to call it our tribe, being with our tribe.
Aw, I love it. Thank you
Yeah,
for
yeah.
describing it. You're selling it, by the way. You're totally selling it. I want to hear it. Well, if anyone wants to get in touch with you, Annie, how could they do that? And how could they do that?
I can be reached at my email is annepersico813 @gmail.com. It's ANNEPERSICO 813 @gmail.com. And if they want to join NPE only after the discovery, we can be found on Facebook and just request to join. I'm actually an admin in the group. There are some questions, and as long as they meet the criteria, we can let them right on in.
Mm.
And we're
Oh,
we're we're here for you. If you're an NPE, please come and join us. It makes a big difference. It makes a big difference.
thank you so much for being an admin. I love these support groups. I love that Facebook support group. And I know
Yeah,
a lot of people have to do a lot of work to keep those going. So thank you for doing that and for volunteering
yeah.
for the community like
You
that.
you're welcome. It's my pleasure.
These stories are here for us to identify with. If you are an NPE and would like to share your story, email npestories@gmail.com. You do not have to give any identifying information. If you are an NPE and would like to share your story, I'd like to hear from you. Subscribe to this podcast to hear more. Come heal with us.